Welcome to the School of Wisdom, a weekly podcast produced for the Bible Bistro, studying the book of Proverbs chapter by chapter. My son, hear the instruction of your father. Forsake not the law of your mother, for they shall be an ornament of grace to your head, and chains about your neck. Now, this week's lesson. Hey there, friends, and welcome back to the School of Wisdom podcast here in the Bible Bistro. This week, Proverbs chapter 7. If you have a chance, why don't you go over to my-dailydose.com. That's the website for the Bible Bistro, and there you will find in the blog outlines for each of these chapters. And you'll find an outline for chapter 7 there. So go on over there, check that out. I really would think you would want to have these outlines as you study. And listen, you don't have to, use these outlines just for this study with me. You could just download the outlines for yourself and as private study, not even playing the podcast. So however you want to do it, those are free to you. They're my gift to you. So go out there and get that, download it. We're looking at chapter 7 today. Chapter 7, the book of Proverbs. The School of Wisdom podcast is a weekly podcast that studies the book of Proverbs chapter by chapter and verse by verse. Each week we look at one chapter and try to do the entirety of the chapter in that one podcast. So these run about 20 minutes, give or take a few minutes. So that's what you're looking at as far as a time commitment here. Let me begin with chapter 7 then. And today, with chapter 7, we have two My Son lessons. The first one is the longest and really takes up the majority of the chapter, goes from verse 1 all the way down to verse 23, and deals significantly with and completely with the strange woman. We've seen her before. She's been a subject of the teacher, and not only the strange woman, but also if we backed out a little bit and looked at this subject from a broader perspective, we could say generally we're talking about not just adultery or fornication, but we're talking about temptation in general, because there are some principles here that work in general with the idea of temptation. So we'll see those. I've actually outlined several steps here that you'll find in this particular chapter. Verse 1, My son, keep my words, and lay up my commandments with thee. Keep my commandments, and live. And my law as the apple of thine eye. Bind them upon thy fingers, write them upon the table of thine heart. Now, we have here something that we've seen over and over again, the commandment to keep the commandments and the law. It's repeated here. Verse 1 has lay up my commandments. Verse 2 has keep my commandments. And remember, in the book of Proverbs, when we have commandments and law, instruction, understanding, discretion, wisdom, doctrine, these things, we're talking about the Word of God. So any of these things that we've outlined so far and that we have in the 10 conditions in chapter 1, when we do that, when he says, keep my words, lay up my commandments, this is not some esoteric knowledge that we have to go out and find. It's not something hidden that needs to be searched for, except that it's in the Word of God, and we have to do our due diligence and study. But it's right here out in the open. We just need to go get it. We know, X marks the spot. Here's where the treasure is. Are you willing to spend any effort to dig that treasure up? It's not hidden. We know what it is. We know where it is. It just takes a little work to get to it. And so here we have it. Keep my commandments. Lay up my commandments. There in verse 1. And we have something here also that we'll see twice in this chapter. Once it's the word live and the other is the word life. We'll see those actually that converse. One's positive, one's negative. We'll see that here in this chapter as well. So the commandments and living are connected together. If you're keeping the commandments in the Word of God and doing what the teacher tells you, then you're going to find life. You're going to live. However, if you reject the commandments and reject the law and reject the instructions of life, you're not going to live. You're going to forfeit your life. Verse 3 has an interesting word here that we've seen actually several times. It's bind. I thought we'd seen it more often than this. We have it here in verse 3 in chapter 7, but you'll find it also in verse 3 in chapter 7. You'll also find it in chapter 3, verse 3 there, and there it says, bind them about thy neck, write them upon the table of thine heart. So we have the same language used in 3:3 as we do here in 7:3, except the very first phrase is different. Bind them upon thy fingers, and there in 3:3 it's bind them about thy neck. But then we have the same phrase in the second part, write them upon the table of thine heart. Exactly what we have there in 3:3 as well. Then we have it in Proverbs 6:21, bind them continually upon thine heart and tie them about thy neck. So you see, the idea here is that we are to write, that we are to bind, that we are to attach these words, these commandments, these laws, in our hearts. We're to put them upon our hearts. And one of the best ways to do that, and we all know this, is to write things out. Things that move through your fingers as you write. Knowledge that moves through your fingers as you write has a way of seeding itself in the heart much more quickly than if you were just to read it or to read it and say it out loud. You know, it's a part of meditation actually to use the speaking, the reading, and the writing to help memorize. And it helps bind that to us. It makes it, it gives us that tactile force that, imprints it on our hearts. That's the idea here when he says, bind them upon thy fingers. We're writing them upon the table of our heart as we write them out. Say unto wisdom, thou art my sister, and call understanding thy kinswoman. Now, when I taught this at church last night, we had the Bible study last night, and I was teaching chapter 7. The group there decided that wisdom and understanding, they are like the superheroes in this chapter. Because we have another lady who's coming right up, who is the villain. But we have here wisdom and understanding standing here with the capes on, and with their, insignia emblazoned across, their uniform. And they're watching all of this happen. And the student here is told, my son, say to wisdom, you're my sister, and to understanding, your kinswoman. So these ladies, these superheroes, are our helpers. Why do we want to have them as our helpers? Verse 5, that they may keep thee from the strange woman, from the stranger which flatters with her words. So these kinswomen, wisdom and understanding that is, they will keep me from the strange woman. Isn't that beautiful? So as I embrace wisdom and understanding, that is through these lessons of keeping and laying up the commandments, binding them upon my fingers, writing them upon the table of my heart, keeping them as the apple of my eye, what's going to happen to me? Well, there's a strange woman out there. She is not wise, and she does not understand. As a matter of fact, there is no wisdom or understanding in her house. That woman is a danger, and these women, wisdom and understanding, will keep me from her. Now we have in verse 6 the beginning of a vignette. He writes this beautiful little vignette. It's a little story that he gives us, our teacher. And beginning in verse 6, we have this beautiful little story that's nicely written. It's balanced, and it comes to a very sharp point. So let's read beginning in verse 6. For at the window of my house I looked through my casement, and beheld among the simple ones, I discerned among the youths a young man void of understanding, passing through the street near her corner, and he went the way to her house, in the twilight, in the evening, in the black and dark night. So here we have the young man. He's the simple one. Now remember, back in the 10 conditions, the fourth condition was that the Proverbs are going to give subtlety to the simple. Well, here's a simple one that hasn't quite gotten the subtlety yet. And our teacher sees this simple one, this young man, and he's headed someplace. Her corner, her house, in the evening, in the dark and black night. So he sees this young man going, and we know that there's going to be a problem. I beheld the simple one. Now we turn and we see the woman. Verse 10, and behold, there met him a woman, with the attire of an harlot, subtle of heart. She is loud and stubborn. Her feet abide not in her house. Now she is without, now in the streets, and lieth in wait at every corner. So we find something out now about the woman. See what I mean when I say it's balanced? I beheld the simple one, and behold, there was a woman. So the simple one is headed to her house. The woman now meets him, and she has a certain attire, and she has a certain attitude and action, and she is making some decisions that apparently are going to lead to a bad situation. Notice the very first thing that it describes here of this woman. She has the attire of an harlot. If you think about what would attract a young man to do something that would be illicit with a woman, it would be attire, the way she dresses. Is it seductive in a way that is overwhelming for a young man? Well, that is what's going on here. And as I said, if we back out a little bit and we don't focus down quite so closely to the strange woman, we back our view out some, we can say that we're talking about temptation in general, because this is always the first step to temptation. We lust with our eyes. We see something. Achan had the same experience when he saw the gold and the silver and the goodly garments in Jericho. And so here we have the lust of the eyes. The first step in temptation is usually the visual step. And how do we today advertise? What's advertisement about? Well, advertisement is always about the visual. We want the best looking thing. There is never, ever a steak commercial that has a poorly cooked steak on it, or one that's small or dry. It always looks beautiful. It's beefy. It's plump. It's hot. It's seared perfectly. It's thick. All those things, we can see that in the commercial. We say, ooh, I'm hungry for a steak. So temptation always begins that way. It always begins with what we see. And here this woman has made a decision to tempt with her dress, because she knows that that is the thing that will attract this young, simple one. She's loud and stubborn. We see she's subtle of heart. That word subtle there means crafty. Her feet abide not in her house. She is without, in the street, at every corner. So she should be in her house. And we're going to see a lady at the end of the book of Proverbs who's in her house, doing what she needs to do to take care of her house. But this woman abandons her responsibilities and goes after something that she should not. Verse 13, so she caught him and kissed him, and with an impudent face said unto him. Now, beginning in 14, we have her speech, and her speech lasts all the way until we get over to verse 20. So 14 through 20, we have the speech of this strange woman. Listen to her. I have peace offerings with me this day. I have paid my vows. Therefore came I forth to meet thee, diligently to seek thy face. And I have found thee. I have decked my bed with coverings of tapestry, with carved works, with fine linen of Egypt. I perfume my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. Come, let us take our fill of love until the morning. Let us solace ourselves with loves. For the goodman is not home. He is gone a long journey. He hath taken a bag of money with him. He will come home at the day appointed. So that's her speech, beginning there in 14, going all the way down to 20. There's a lot that we can say about this. There's a whole lot we can say about this. First of all, we have verse 14 primarily. Verse 14 is her religious duty. She doesn't come off as one who is without some sort of moral foundation. She says to him, hey, look, I paid my peace offerings today. The peace offering was always the offering of worship. It was for Thanksgiving. It was at the conclusion of a vow. The vow was ended and the peace offering was made to celebrate the vow. It was an offering of praise and worship to God. So she had done her religious duty. And she said, now that's past. My vow is finished. I've made my peace offerings. So I came out here to find you. I went forth to meet thee diligently and to seek thy face, and I have found thee. So we have her intent. Even though while doing her religious duty, apparently she's thinking about searching out for this young man. I went forth to meet thee, diligently to seek thee. I've found thee. And then you'll notice the second step in temptation here is the imagined thing. We had the visual step there in verse 1 with the attire. Now we have the imagined thing. So this is step number 2. She says, I've decked my beds with coverings of tapestry, with carved works, with fine linen of Egypt. I have perfumed my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. So he's thinking about how nice it would be to be in that setting. Wouldn't that be lovely? Wouldn't it be comfortable? Wouldn't it look good? Wouldn't it smell good? It would be so nice. And so he's imagining now what it would be like to be in that place. So she's enticed him with her looks. Now she's enticing him with what it might look like and be like to be in her bed. And then the third step of temptation is verse 18, and that is the invitation. She says, come, let us take our fill of love until the morning. Let us solace ourselves with love. So she actually now invites him. Remember chapter 1, verse 10. The teacher there tells us, my son, when sinners entice thee, consent thou not. When they say, come, and then he gives the list of things that they want the young man to come and do. Here this woman says, come. She's enticing him. When they entice you, consent thou not. This is the invitation to come and sin. So she's tempted him with her looks, with what could be imagined, and then she invites him. She says, let's go do this. So now he's on the hook. He has to make a decision, yes or no. I'm coming with her, I'm not coming with her. She doesn't stop there, though, because the fourth step in temptation is the excuse. You'll notice there in verse 19, for the goodman is not at home. Oh, so now there's no sneaking around. He can go straight to her house because the husband is gone. He's on a long journey. He's taken a bag of money, which means he's going to be gone a long time. He will come home at the day appointed. He's not going to show up and surprise us. So the invitation is given in verse 18, and then in verse 19, and in verse 20. Nobody's going to know. My husband is gone. This is just going to be us, and we can take our time and do what we please. So 4 steps here to the temptation: the visual, the imagined, the invitation, and then the excuse. This is how we're going to get away with it. So that's her entire speech there, all the way down through verse 20. Nobody's going to know, she says. He'll come home at the day appointed. And then we have the result. Now, if you have the outline, you'll see this. And I didn't put it in the outline, but I see 2 pieces here. First, verse 21. Her result. This is what she's doing. With her much fair speech, she caused him to yield. With the flattering of her lips, she forced him. So this is her side. Of course, it's all about him. He yields, and he's forced, or rather, the word forced there is probably better translated seduced. So he yields and he's seduced. Why? Because she has flattered with fair speech. And this is a trait of the strange woman. We see it over and over again. Of course, sin always does that, doesn't it? Sin and temptation always says to us, oh, you're just wonderful. You deserve this. Don't think there's anything wrong here. So, fair speech. Then we have 22 and 23, and this is the result again for the man. He goeth after her. And then we have these similitudes. As the ox, as the fool, as the bird. Let me read 22 and 23. He goeth after her straightway as an ox goeth to the slaughter, or as a fool to the correction of the stocks, till a dart strike through his liver, as a bird hasteneth to the snare, and knoweth not that it is for his life. Now there we have the word life again, and you'll recall that I said at the very beginning, in verse 2, the teacher tells us to keep the commandments and live. Okay, so that's the positive side. Here we have, he knoweth not that it is for his life. This man has forgot the commandments or ignored them, and now his life is in jeopardy. He's forfeit life because he's as a bird in the snare, an ox in the slaughter, the fool in the stocks. So it's not good for him. These are the results. He yields, he's seduced, he goes to the slaughter, to the stocks, to the snare. This is his life. Now we come to the second my son lesson, and this is a my sons lesson, because you'll notice it says, hearken unto me now, therefore, O ye children. Children there can be translated sons. Students, we're still in the school here, and so he's talking to the entire class. Students, attend to the words of my mouth. Now, if you have the outline, you'll notice that I have pasted in here 3 other places in the book of Proverbs where we have the word attend. 4:1, 4:20, and 5:1. All of them the same thing. Attend to know understanding, attend to my words, attend unto my wisdom. Here we have attend to the words of my mouth. So it's kind of the same thing. But I thought it was interesting. This word just keeps popping up. Just like bind keeps popping up, so attend keeps popping up. And of course, this is the repetition of the teacher. We've had it with bind. We've had it now with attend. The teacher is teaching us, and part of good pedagogy is repetition. It helps cement these facts in our minds. Now we have one command and the reason why we should keep this command. He tells us here, let not thine heart decline to her ways, go not astray in her paths. So again, the paths are mentioned. We've had these before. We've talked about the path. There's a path that leads to life and a path that leads to death. The path that leads to life is a path of wisdom. The path that leads to death is a path of wickedness. So this is the path of wickedness. It declines to something. It goes downhill. Her ways always go downhill. Do not go astray in her paths. You're out in the weeds if you're following after her, if you're going by her corner. And the reason why you don't want to do that is the last 2 verses. For she hath cast down many wounded. Yea, many strong men have been slain by her, going down to the chambers of death. So you see, I'm sorry, I missed a piece there. Her house is the way to hell, going down to the chambers of death. So you see, this woman, she is not good for the soul. This is not soul care. This is soul destruction. Cast down, slain by, house is the way to hell. So this is an ugly, ugly scene. The man is going to the slaughter as an ox. He's going into her house, which apparently is the opening to hell, and is going to the chambers of death. Chapter 5, verse 8, chapter 2, verse 18 also mention her house, and we have similar language there to describe what her place is like. It sounds like a funeral parlor. Here it sounds like a portal to the afterlife. Okay, well, that'll do it. That's 27 verses. I hope you'll come back again next week, and we'll take up Proverbs chapter 8 on the School of Wisdom podcast. Hey, thanks for listening to the School of Wisdom podcast. If you're listening to this over YouTube, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so that you'll be notified every time one of these podcasts is uploaded. I really appreciate all my followers, and I try to respond to each and every one of your questions. Come again next week, and we'll enjoy another lesson in the School of Wisdom.